Chuck, hello. Welcome here with us today. I'm very happy that you joined us for Sovereignty Speaks. I think this is like number 23, is that right? 24? It's been a great series. We've had some wonderful speakers, great conversations over the years that we've been doing this. And we're very excited about today's speaker, and you'll hear more about him in a few minutes. We're very proud of our Sovereignty Speaks, of our Center for Sovereign Nations that we have had here for a few years now. And in addition to this, it does lots of things to help students, American Indian students on campus, and we're very pleased with that as well. I'm the provost here at Oklahoma State University, Gary Sanford, a proud member of the Unconquered and Unconquerable Chickasaw Nation. And again, glad that you could all join us here today. I'm not going to talk long. I want to introduce the director of our center, Elizabeth Payne, and she'll tell you more about our program today. Elizabeth.
As a brief aside, the history department is doing a candidate search for a professor position, and we had the opportunity to visit with one of the candidates earlier today, and it was with really great pride that we were able to speak about the university's commitment to sovereign nations, to the citizens of sovereign nations that are students on our campus, and the fact that our provost is a citizen of the Chickasaw Nation, that he has a bold vision, which is shared not only by our president, but our regents, our faculty, staff, and other nations that are with us as guests. We have Mr. Neil McCaleb at the Chickasaw Nation. We have Donna writing in here of the Pawnee Nation. We have many, many citizens of many nations in our presence, in addition to our speaker, who is a citizen of the Cherokee Nation. Just a lot of important things that happen. And as this center, I just would like to say we are very grateful for your investment in our students and in our program. So with only a little further ado, I would like to introduce Mr. Mark Masters. We met Mark a number of years ago. He would come and speak to our entrepreneurship classes in the Spears School of Business. He's actually done business deals with a few folks in this room. He is generous with his lessons learned and with his wisdom. He says he learned all of that from Oklahoma State University, where he got a couple of degrees along the way. And you might want to know that he has been honored by the Small Business Administration as Entrepreneur of the Year. And that bears a pause, because that is a huge organization. So not only is he a cowboy, but he is a Cherokee citizen and a very accomplished entrepreneur, and we are grateful that he would make time, joined by his team, to come and be with us today. So without further ado, to you.
My name is Mark Masters, and it's excellent to be here today. I want to thank Sovereign Nation Center for having me in the university. Before I get started, I feel like I got to tell you guys a funny story. So in 2009, I moved back here to Oklahoma, and being a entrepreneurial young individual that was trying to start a federal contracting business, I applied to the Spears School of Business to go through the MBA program. And I actually got rejected. I was told my GPA was too low and I had a non-business degree, so they were not interested in having me. And so fast forward a couple of years, and Elizabeth was kind enough to have me back to speak to her entrepreneurship class, ironically after I won the National Entrepreneurship Award from the SBA. And the first time I walked in there into the Spears School, there was a digital board like this, and it said, Spears School of Business welcomes distinguished cowboy alum Mark Masters. And so I thought that was really full circle. That was really So that's kind of the trajectory of my business path, to be honest. And we'll bust through my background just to give you a bit of context, and then we'll jump into some Q&A. That's probably where I'm a lot more comfortable, to be honest. So just real quick, I am from Jay, Oklahoma. And, like a lot of folks that come from rural Oklahoma and come from across the Indian country, came from a pretty impoverished upbringing, definitely below the poverty level, and first-generation college student, and was fortunate enough to attend Oklahoma State University with the help of some scholarships, but also working as a federal employee. So when I was 18 years old, I got my first job as a federal employee, making $9.42 an hour as a firefighter out in Oregon. And so I would go fight fire for different agencies in the U.S. Department of Interior and the U.S. Forest Service, and did that every summer, and was able to pay for my education here during the school year at OSU, and then upon graduation continued that career path. And so kind of started out at an entry level, as a GS3 entry level firefighter for the U.S. Department of Interior, and then fast forward 9 years later, I was fortunate enough to do some work with the National Interagency Fire Center, which is the organizing body, one of the major organizing bodies within our industry within wildland fire. And so in between there, did a lot of work in aviation and stuff. And so anyway, so in 2009, I decided to cash in my retirement and move back home to Oklahoma and try and start a contracting business, federal contracting business. And we started with very humble beginnings. We went back to Jay, my hometown, and we had a dirt floor barn, no joke, at my grandpa's field. And I had some friends from Idaho that were Forest Service employees, and they would come down and help me. And we did day labor. And we would go burn a farmer's pasture for $200 or $300 or $400. And we did that for about 2 years, just trying to make ends meet and get our past performance built up as a company. And then we were able to go after our first round of Forest Service contracts in about 2010 and 2011. So we provided staffing of firefighters across the U.S. And then from there, things have just grown in all directions immensely. So we're doing a lot of environmental consulting now. We do infrastructure management. We have a pretty healthy aviation, including drone program, and a big, pretty robust training program. And so it's just amazing what one thing leads to another. We started out just staffing small contracts for the Forest Service, calling need to provide firefighters, and then now we've gotten into doing all kinds of work for civilian federal agencies, and we do a lot of work for the military. So the Department of Defense is by far our largest client the last couple of years. So yeah, so not a traditional business trajectory by any means. I didn't have an MBA, didn't have a business background. You can imagine in 2009 at the peak of the economic downturn, when you're 26 years old, you have no capital for collateral, you have no business experience, you have no business degree. It's difficult to get financing to start a business, and I will say that I initially, in the first year or so of the business, I went to 17 banks in 4 states trying to get financing, and the bank that gave me a shot was Bank 2, Chickasaw Bank, and had it not been for them, we wouldn't be in business. And so we were able to get a start with them, and then move on to other banks that were more well suited as the company grew. But they were willing to give us a chance because we were native owned when no one else would. I'll give you another example of the impact that folks in the Indian country, like small business and federal contracting world, have on us. So in 2009, when I was thinking about leaving the federal government, I went on a big tour of trying to get people's advice and guidance on if I should leave the federal government and my idea for a federal contracting business. And everyone I met with told me no. And I'll never forget, I went to a SCORE office in Little Rock, Arkansas, which SCORE is retired executives. The SBA links up with entrepreneurs to give them business advice. And I went in and I saw this SCORE retired executive, and he just told me, look, you're crazy. Like, this is not a good idea. This is not going to work. You shouldn't do it. He goes, you just need to stick with your job you're at. And that was a lot of the feedback I got about that time. And I'll never forget the first person that ever gave me hope that my business idea I'd been working on for about a year might work was at the Cherokee Nation Small Business Center. I walked in Tahlequah, and I said, look, I've talked to a lot of people all over the U.S. Everyone thinks I'm crazy, but I really think that I can build a large company by doing this. And Mackie Moore was there, who some of you probably know, and he said, well, come in, let's go through it. And we sat there for 3 days and 3 nights, basically, in his office. And he tore apart my business plan, and we vetted every part of it, and he asked me lots of questions. But for the first time, that was the first person that ever believed in the business was, someone from my own tribe, which was, in hindsight, is really, special to look back on that when no one else thought it could be done, the resources were available from, my own tribe for free, being a tribal member to help out. So anyway, one other quick thing I wanted to talk about, and then we'll jump on to Q&A. We do a lot of work in emergency management, homeland security, and some of you may or may not be familiar with this, but in 2013, the Sandy Recovery Act amended the Stafford Act and allowed tribal nations for the first time ever to declare their own disasters. So prior to 2013, if a disaster occurred on tribal land or impacting tribal members, a state agency, a state had to be involved to submit a declaration to the President of the U.S. And fortunately, in 2013, Congress and administration said, these are sovereign nations, so why wouldn't we operate on a government-to-government basis, even in emergency management? And so that legislation was amended with the new act to include tribes to be able to declare their own emergencies. And if you think about it, it sounds like just an administrative bureaucratic thing, but think about the significance of the leader of a sovereign nation, leader of a tribe, being able to directly communicate with the President of the U.S. on a nation-to-nation basis. And so I take a lot of pride in the emergency management mission that our company has, not that we don't do other things that are outside that discipline, because from my perspective, what's a better example of self-determination and sovereignty than a tribe being able to respond to its own incidents and communicate with the federal government on a nation-to-nation basis. So, and we're real fortunate that we get to do a lot of work in that space. We do a lot of work with federal agencies, both defense and civilian related, with regard to their interaction with tribes. So tribal liaising, which is a really sweet spot for us. That's work that we feel good about and really enjoy doing. So anyway, I could sit here and ramble on all day long, but what I really like to do is spend some quality time in Q&A, so hopefully I can provide some folks some value outside of just standing up here and talking. So with that, do you guys have any questions? Ms. Payne?
Is it an easy process for an entrepreneur to become certified to do federal contracting?
So we have our 8A certification, which some of you are probably familiar with, and we've got about two more years or less than 2 years to go on that before it expires. Being an individual tribal member, there's a 9-year maximum length on the 8A program with the Small Business Administration. And tribal businesses, or tribally owned businesses, there's effectively no expiration date. And so, the Chickasaws, for example, the Cherokees, a lot of tribes here in Oklahoma and across the U.S. and Alaska have taken great advantage of that and been able to bring a great deal of economic development to their tribal nations by federal contracts. So, but yeah, I mean, we applied for the 8A and we had the 8A. It was not easy for us. It's probably easier for tribes that have teams of attorneys and that have lots of 8As companies. But for us, no, it took about 4 or 5 tries. It was about a 9-month-long period of submitting an application and having it kicked back from the SBA. And just, having some really absurd questions asked, like essentially, how Indian are you? Like, prove you're Indian, like, And so, as one man killer used to say, an Indian's an Indian is an Indian, right? But that didn't go over too well with the SBA. So, but we were fortunate to get through and get approved. So, there's that benefit. And then obviously we do a lot of work for state and local governments that is grant funded from the Department of Transportation and other civilian federal agencies. And so, some of the TARO certifications that we have and the ODOT certifications that have reciprocity across the U.S. really helpful to us to get contracts. So, so I guess the short answer is it easy? No. But is it totally doable? Absolutely. Yes, sir.
Can you tell us a little bit about your aviation business?
Sure. So we don't own any aircraft. We have a handful of contracts where we staff aircraft. So it's called a GOCO model, government-owned, contractor-operated. So the federal government owns, in this case, typically fixed-wing aircraft, and we'll provide pilots, co-pilots, and other aircrew on those contracts. So that's one of the contracts we have. We have another contract where you guys have probably seen the retardant dropped out of airplanes, the red stuff on wildfires. That stuff typically comes from a fixed tanker base, so a place that's, an established, the infrastructure is built and maintained by the Forest Service or Bureau of Land Management. At times there are fires where they have a need for a portable air tanker base, so we have a contract where we can go out to a remote airstrip, for example, and we can set up a tanker base. So we'll bring in all the tanks and pumps and personnel, forklifts, everything that's needed on semi-trucks, and go to what was otherwise a remote airstrip, and within 24 hours, have it set up to be able to pump retardant into planes to be able to drop on fires. We can do that anywhere in the U.S. in about 24 hours.
What's the typical mission for your fixed wing?
So a lot of ISR work. So I don't know if you're familiar with that. So gathering intel, obviously. The agencies, the civilian agencies we work for, are a bit behind the power curve. There's some technology that's been used for a decade or more in the DoD that's very commonplace now that we're trying to apply to some of our civilian agency partners and that they're working to implement. But most of it's surveillance and reconnaissance.
Do you do any international work?
We do a bit of work out CONUS, outside the continental U.S. currently. So most of our work is CONUS.
ISR?
We don't do any CONUS ISR work, but we have a teaming partner, a large business teaming partner that we work with that does a substantial amount of CONUS or ISR work, and that's primarily their business. So we're trying to apply some of those same, and what we mean by ISR is, imagine a manned or unmanned aircraft, in this case manned aircraft, that's flying at very high altitude, that's much safer than flying at the low altitude, that has really advanced technology on it, some high-end sensors, where we can use an infrared camera, what we call an IOER sensor, to zoom in on the ground and just tell you certain levels of detail of things, be able to zoom in and, for example, to tell you the color of the vehicle, or maybe even like the license plate from 10,000 feet, above ground level. So you can imagine the application of that kind of military technology to natural disasters here in the continental U.S. I mean, there's immense applicability, especially if you begin to overlay things like fire spread on there, or maybe damage from a hurricane in real time, data that's gathered via satellites and sensors, and then also, combined with the ability to overlay locations of equipment and personnel. So there's just immense opportunity there, application of those, DoD technologies, continued adoption of them here in the civilian agencies. Yes, sir.
So what was it that inspired you to follow this path? And what gave you the idea? And secondly, why did you believe in it so strongly?
Sure. So the middle part of that story, I skipped that 8 years I was with the federal government. I was one of those folks that wasn't right in the head that jumped out of aircraft into the forest fires for a living. And so I met my wife here, who's also an OSU grad, and it turns out when you're about to get married, jumping out of aircraft into forest fires is no longer a suitable profession. And so I had to look at other options. It just wasn't a sustainable career path for me. And I had been away from home for several years, home in Oklahoma. And when I went to work for the national office, I, for the first time ever, started to deal with the administration of contracts a bit, or at least be around it. And in the field for the preceding 6 or 7 years, I had seen contractors that provided services to the agencies, like staffing and firefighters. And once I got to the national office, I realized, these people are making a lot of money doing this, and I feel like I can do it a lot better. That's the bottom line. And so I had an idea that what if you take those what we call more elite type 1 individuals, smoke jumpers, hot shots, hell repellers, guys like me that had a background like me, and you built a company around them and you contracted them out to the agency. And so what if we could do that at the same price point or a lower price point than these other existing industry contractors, but provide a way higher level of service? So that was where the initial idea came from. And then, moving back here to Oklahoma, there wasn't a lot of job opportunity. To be honest, at that time, peak of the economic downturn, I had a real niche skill set in that industry, and so it wasn't widely applicable to other things. I'll give you some examples. In 2010, when the business was really struggling, I remember 2 jobs specifically that I applied for. I applied for a minimum wage unarmed security guard at OU Health Sciences Center, and I also applied for just an entry-level minimum wage job at Bass Pro Shops, and I didn't get either of them. And I had a college degree and 5 years of federal work experience post-college at that time, and that's just, I think, kind of indicative of what the job market was. And thank goodness I didn't get them in hindsight. I was really struggling at that time, but really, there was a blessing in disguise because I had no other choice but to stick with the business and make it work. And so You know, those 2009, 10, 11, those were difficult times. You know, a lot of other businesses that we go up against in competition or that we do business with, you know, they have a lot different story than we do, and we have to sometimes remind ourselves that, you know, we didn't come the private equity fund route, we didn't come the angel investor route, that, you know, we were legitimately bootstrapped from the beginning and still have not taken on any outside capital. And so that's something, at the time, you know, there was really no other option, but in hindsight, I'm really proud about now, you know, that we can, as a management team of our company, look back and say that. What else? Yes, sir.
What percentage of your contracts are sole source negotiated contracts?
So an increasing amount of them. If we weren't about to expire or lapse in the 8A program, I think it would be a whole lot more. So, you know, for folks that are thinking about starting a small business and do federal contracting, one recommendation I would have is to wait to get that 8A because you only have 9 years. So what happened with us is we were real aggressive at trying to get it because we knew it was going to help us grow. But then once we had it, it's like the dog that catches the car. Like, what do you do with it now? And so you only have a finite amount of time, that 9 years. Well, you know, for the first 4 or 5 years of that 9 years, we weren't large enough to service a lot of very big contracts. And so we didn't get any sole source contracts for really the first 5 years. And now, the last couple of years, we've gotten quite a few sole source contracts, primarily from the Department of Defense. The Department of Defense in general has just been a really good client for us because once we've proven what we're capable of doing, they've been, you know, really apt to give us new work and give us new opportunities to do a good job and stuff. So, you know, right now I would say that the number of contracts we get awarded that are sole source per year is pretty low, but definitely our largest contracts by far are 8A sole source ones. So, and that's kind of the holy grail in, you know, federal contracting is, you know, you want to find a way to be able to solve a problem for a federal agency and then to be able to get the work to you or your company non-competitively, and that's what we mean by sole source. It's a no-bid process. But along with that too, Mr. McCaleb, so, you know, we've got 16 months or whatever it is here until we graduate, and so for our management team, that's a big looming deadline because that day, for us, you know, even though we're still a pretty small business, we'll have to go up against the big boys. You know, we won't have that leverage to be able to get those sole source contracts, and, you know, we may be competing against companies that are vastly larger than us, and so we're making a really concerted effort right now to get all of our infrastructure really tightened up so that, you know, basically we've got a year and a half until we have to go to market and play with the really big companies, and so we're not going to be able to go to an agency at that point and say, yeah, just give us a sole source non-competitive. So. Yes, ma'am. Did you have one? Yeah.
I did.
Okay.
So if one is a student and they happen to be a citizen of the sovereign nation and they are interested in starting a business, would your advice be that they go to work for a government that might help them learn about that contracting, or should they try to seek opportunities through the TARO program? And maybe you could share with everybody what TARO is. We'd just like to know, what might somebody do from the spot they sit in as a senior at Oklahoma State University if they really want to be part of a world that's similar to yours?
Well, first, I always say this jokingly, but I would tell them don't do it. That's what I always tell entrepreneurship classes. When I speak at OU or OSU, I tell them don't do it. It's a lot of work. But yeah, I mean, the first thing is they've got to get some credibility in their industry. Unfortunately, I had a little bit of that from having the work experience I had. And then they got to solve a problem. I mean, this is business 101, right? But like, what's your value proposition? Why can you do something better, cheaper, faster than the other guys? Or, you know, why can you solve a problem that that maybe is not being solved yet? Or, you know, like here's the real play in federal contracting. You demonstrate to the government that the problem exists that may or may not even been recognized. You know, some of our biggest 8A sole source contracts were going to agencies in the military to say, look, we've done this research, here's a white paper, you know, this research exists out there, but you probably haven't aggregated in a way where you could see that there is a problem here and we can solve this problem. And so the light bulb goes on, and so like those are the best candidates for sole source work, is where you have a problem that you're solving that maybe the government didn't even realize was a problem previously until you brought it to their attention. So, but yeah, I mean, the other thing is, you know, they can go into a public agency and get experience in that field, or, you know, they could go to a defense contractor and get experience that route. There's plenty of ways to go about doing it, but I will say this, if someone is a tribal citizen, there's immense leverage that can be applied towards federal contracts that a lot of people don't know, between the 8A, between the Hub Zone program, between the TARO programs, the DOT, MBE certifications, and that's a bunch of alphabet soup, I know to everyone. But basically what that means is, if you're a tribal citizen in various state and federal laws across the U.S., there are socioeconomic advantages that can be applied to your company to help benefit you in being more competitive in getting federal contracts. And obviously, we've leveraged those to the max on the federal side, but there's no reason any other person, that's a tribal citizen in any federally recognized tribe can't do the exact same thing and go in and apply for those same programs and get those certifications. And then, the way that we always talk about it too, though, is like having your 8A or being a native-owned company, that's not a competitive advantage. You've got to be able to also do the work cheaper, better, faster. And so the way to think about those advantage programs is, if everything were equal and you were going up against a non-native business, then in theory you should get, a 1% bump or a 5%, whatever however it's calculated objectively, to say we're a small native-owned business and we're equally as good as them and we're just as good on price, but here's why you should use us, because of the socioeconomic program. And I think the mistake a lot of people think is that, if they're a tribal citizen, they think, well, I'll just get my 8A and contracts are just going to flow in. It does not work like that at all. Or they think that, we just, sometimes folks are less concerned with getting work done well than they are getting the contracts. And so, that's a difficult thing for people to understand. So there is immense leverage there, but you also got to understand how to tactfully use the leverage and what it was intended for too. It's not meant to be a free flow of contracts if you're not capable of doing the work. It's just meant to make it a level playing field is what it's for. If all other factors are equal, it should be a level playing field. And it should be, right? Yes, sir.
I know you're not a business major, but is there one class that you wished you had taken? Is there an area or a class that you wished that you had taken in retrospect?
I'll tell you the program that I went through that I wish I could go through again now. So in about 2012, I applied for a scholarship from the U.S. Department of Interior for tribal citizens to go through an accelerated MBA program. And it was administered by the Tuck School of Business at Dartmouth, which is an Ivy League business school, renowned. And for a couple weeks, I was able to hole up in a room like this with a room full of other native business owners and a number of professors from this Ivy League university, and have them teach an accelerated version of accounting, marketing, finance, etc. And every assignment that we had went back to our business plan. So they would teach a lecture, an hour or two or a couple hours, and then we'd go back to our business plan and say, solve this problem with your business in your business plan. And that couple week-long program, I probably learned more than anything, and it was a scholarship, thankfully, for tribal citizens. And so that program doesn't exist anymore. It was around for a couple more years, I don't think. But I wish that we could go through that now as an established business with our management team, because I think the value we would get out of something like that would be immense. But I will tell you a funny story about this one. I have no problem sharing our humble background, but so I get this scholarship, and I'm like, sweet, I'm going to go to this, Ivy League business thing for 3 weeks. Like, this can't be anything but good, right? This is going to help. And I was broke, flat broke. This was like 2011, and so I'm like, well, I'm just going to have to sleep in my truck in the parking lot at the place where this thing's happening, and I'm going to have to eat, bologna sandwiches out of my ice chest, which I did a lot of for several years there. And so I was, playing it cool. We're on like second or third day of it, and one day they don't open the doors right at 8 a.m., and the students and some of the professors start gaggling up outside. Well, I come rolling out of the back seat of my old pickup in the parking lot, just waking up, and everyone's looking at me, saying, was that guy just asleep in the back of his truck out there? And it's like, yeah, he sure was. So, but you just never know, where things are going to lead. Obviously, we're in a whole new world now. I mean, we're fortunate to have facilities in, Washington, Idaho, 2 in Oklahoma, 1 in Florida, and, employ a couple hundred employees at any given time. But just kind of, I guess the takeaway there is everyone's got to start somewhere, right? That was my starting point. And thank goodness for the education I got here, even though it wasn't in business. And thank goodness for the support of my tribe. And thank goodness for other mentors I've had that were native-owned business owners trying to walk the same journey of federal contracting, because without all those things, I would not have been able to do it, no doubt. Yes, ma'am.
How long do you have to sleep in your truck?
That night?
Just that night?
Oh,
How
for that was a 2 or 3 week thing, so yeah. So I think I snuck into like a truck stop shower like every few days. So yeah, humble beginnings. Like people say they have humble beginnings. It's like, no, you don't. You may not know humble beginnings. Yes, ma'am.
What are some of the, are you at liberty to disclose any of your more recent contracts?
Sure. Yeah, we can talk about some of them. Some of the like less Homeland Security related type ones. We're doing a really cool project right now in the state of Washington. Emily here at this table from our office is real familiar with it. We are looking at an invasive species called a zebra mussel, which this one does have a science component, right? So we're trying to apply some incident management concepts to this invasive species. So we've heard a bunch of different numbers get thrown out there, but one that I saw the other day from Headwaters Economic was if this mussel, which by the way, so I'll tell you a little bit about this. So this mussel's from Asia. It's just a little like, invasive mussel. It's about that big. But they proliferate. So a female can lay like over 1 million eggs in a year. And it came into New Jersey like 8 or 10 years ago or whatever, and it got into the Great Lakes and did a mass amount of damage over the last decade in the Great Lakes, economic damage. And the reason is they'll get a hold of docks, they'll get on boats, or worst of all, they will get in drinking water production plant, like intake sources, and they will completely clog it up because these mussels proliferate so quickly they will attach to each other and it basically becomes concrete. It does effectively become concrete, and you can't break through it. And so there have been research where they'll dip a car in a lake for like 90 days and it comes out and you can't even recognize it's a car. It's just covered in millions and millions of these things, and it's just basically like you dipped it in concrete. And so you can imagine all the harm that could cause. So these things have been located in Montana now. So they slowly made their way across the U.S. So like, let's say you go out and you go fishing and you have some larvae on your boat, you don't realize it, and then the next weekend you go 100 miles away or 50 miles away to another lake. That's how they transport across the U.S. So they got all the way from the East Coast. It took years, and they decimated the Great Lakes and stuff, and then they made it over to the Northwest here recently in the last like 18 to 24 months, and they've been confirmed in 1 or 2 locations in Montana. Well, that's a really big concern because according to Headwaters Economics, if they get over the Continental Divide, they're projecting a $10 billion impact to tourism and fisheries industries over the next decade because of this little guy. So we're doing some projects for the state of Washington right now that are really exciting, where we're helping improve their rapid response plan, and we're actually doing some functional exercises for them. So we're going in, and what's neat about this project, so there's two tribes we're working with, the Colville and Spokane tribes. We're working with U.S. Army Corps of Engineers because there's a dam there. We've got the Forest Service, various state agencies, and we're writing an exercise program for them to say, okay, let's simulate that you found this zebra mussel in this lake. What would you do? How would you quarantine that so that it didn't have a massive economic impact across the state? And then our employees will actually go out and exercise that plan with them, and so we'll run them through drills to practice how they would manage that response. So that's a really neat program we're working on right now. We've got a teaming agreement with a large business that I mentioned, multinational, multi-billion-dollar corporation that we're waiting on the shutdown to end to get that approved by the SBA, but as soon as it does, we think that's going to be some real growth opportunities for us. They are going through a merger right now. When the merger's done, they'll be the 8th largest of all federal contractors, and so that'll be really good for us to partner with them, and there's some niche skill sets that we can offer to help them even as big as they are, and obviously they have immense resources that they've made available to us, so that's a real cool project that we're working on right now that we're real excited about. What else? Can you think of any others? Oh, I know another one. Another really cool project we have going on right now is we are doing disaster relief down in Florida for some state agencies right now. We're running heavy equipment down there 24/7 and have been since the hurricane came through the Panhandle last fall, and that work will continue. And so that's work we're doing for a state agency that they'll submit for a FEMA grant reimbursement on, and people don't realize that recovery work, it will go on for months or even years. Like, I'll give you an example. What we're doing right now is we're going around to some state parks. Our crews are going to state parks, and they're opening up roads that, they're still closed, and, they've got a lot of miles of road left to go. So that will be an ongoing project for, who knows, months or potentially even years for that agency. So those are a couple of the neater projects that I get excited about, and we do a lot of stuff too that's equally as important that, probably doesn't get my rotors turning, but we do a lot of, environmental consulting that is really, really important work, and the infrastructure management work, is also really important. So like coming in for a federal agency and looking at their facilities and looking at their, the age of those facilities, looking at how much they're spending on routine maintenance and repairs, and then making recommendations as a consultant to say, here's how much you're spending per person per foot, like here's what we project your needs are for the next decade. Yes, you should we recommend you continue to invest money in this facility, or no, you should build a new facility. That kind of work is really important too. It's got a, there's a common thread with all the work we do, and it's really hard sometimes to explain to people that like we don't just staff firefighters anymore, because that's still what a lot of people view our company as. But the common thread with all of our work is there seems to always be like this public infrastructure and resiliency component. There's always some degree of like we're planning for disasters and trying to make agencies more resilient for disasters. What else? Yes, ma'am.
Can you talk about a lot of the work that we do, like even in Oklahoma?
Yeah, so we don't do a ton of work in Oklahoma, but some of the work we do a little bit of work for nonprofits here in the state, helping them with some prescribed fire. We do, I know what you're getting at. We do have one really neat project too that I forgot to mention a while ago. We have a contract with the state health department where we are part of the regional medical response system, and that's a grant from the U.S. Health and Human Services. And so the way to think about it is it's a really capacity building grant from U.S. Health and Human Services that is doled out across the U.S. to state health department agencies, or sometimes it's given to council of government and that sort of thing. But anyway, so that's a really neat project because it's allowed us to become kind of a very small but important part of the state response framework. And so interfacing with other state agencies on that contract for planning and preparedness and response is something that we do day in and day out, 24/7. So that is a really neat project because we have a lot of people with diverse skill sets, and we're doing this work all over the U.S. for the federal government. And prior to that contract in the last year, it was rare that we actually did much here at home, to be honest. I mean, we did some small things for tribes here and there, or nonprofits, but that's a real rewarding contract where we're staffing people, year-round to help keep Oklahomans safe and be a part of the big picture of preparedness and response in the state. What else?
Can you really read our license plate numbers from 10,000 feet?
I can, but there are some people that can't. Yes, ma'am.
Good question.
How do you keep track of all of it? I mean, with so many different contracts and so many different locations, and is it challenging just to keep up with all
Sure,
the
we've
various
had
stages?
drone pages like no other business. I mean, they can tell you as well as us. I mean, they heard me on the phone all the way here from Oklahoma City. Like, yeah, of course we have drone paints. Scaling is always a problem, right? And that's a problem in industry, private sector, in nonprofit world, here, academia. Like, figuring out how to scale things is always a challenge. And so that's really our biggest challenge over the last year or two. For a long time it was proof of concept. It was proving the idea would work and surviving, right? And then, for a number of years it was trying to figure out how to refine our services and how to be profitable and operate safely and start growing. And then like the last couple of years, the big question has been like, okay, how do we take this? We've had success, and how do we scale that to like a whole other level? And so there's all kinds of challenges with that. Just for example, internally, we're going through a lot of internal infrastructure redesign right now. Things that you think are going to work at 10, 50, 100 employees don't work at 150, 200, 300 employees. Benefit systems, the way people enter their time, the way people communicate with each other, the way work is assigned. I mean, you name it. I mean, just all these process things that you don't think about with growth. You'll create a system and you think, yep, that's going to work great. And then eventually you get a number of employees and you start adding more offices and more complexity, right, to any system. And eventually it seems like it you'll find the break point in it. So that's been a big thing for us. That's why we're real excited about this teaming agreement we got with this large business, because they've been really open with us about sharing some of their processes about how they manage a whole nother magnitude of scale way beyond the size we are. So, we're still tiny compared to them. So, yes, ma'am.
What do you consider when you're thinking about moving into a new area? I mean, you start out with wildland firefighting, then you add these different areas of service to the point where now you're doing infrastructure analysis for, federal agencies and different organizations. How do you determine where the opportunities are, where that's a good area for you to grow, and how do you avoid stretching yourself too thin?
Yes, ma'am. So some of that was a natural fit, right? So if you think about it, the same skill sets that are required to manage a large forest fire lend themselves to managing any kind of large disaster, right? Same thing, the kind of like science and tech savvy people that we have in that environment, foresters, wildlife biologists, et cetera, they have other skill sets that are related to tangential fields as well. But a lot of it's organic too, so a lot of it is pre-planned where we've strategically said we want to get into this market, but there's definitely been some opportunities where an agency comes to us and says, you're doing this really well, this is a related service, can you do it? And for us, as a small business, the answer is yes. If we can do it safely and properly, we will find a way and we'll do it for the agency. And so some of our better agency partnerships, that's how they came about. I would have never envisioned that we would be doing the infrastructure work, for example, but when you start out fighting forest fires and then, maybe they need a forest management plan, and then maybe they need some environmental consulting, and that gets over into some hydrology stuff, and the next thing you know, they're coming to you saying, do you have engineers? Can you look at facilities? And it's like, no, we haven't done that, but can certainly do it. We can go find some experts in that field, and, if you want to give us a contract, like, yeah, we'd love to help with that. And so a lot of it was pretty organic, and then, but, some aspects of it, like the aviation stuff, I come from an aviation background, and so I've always wanted to get back into aviation. Aircraft are expensive, so I knew that wasn't an option right off the bat. So we found other ways to make headway into that market. We found the contracts where we don't have to own the aircraft, but we can provide some expertise to staff the aircraft that someone else owns, typically the government. So, we just, we're persistent, no doubt, and we just try and be adaptive and flexible to meet the needs of whatever the agencies are asking us for. But on the flip side, not be too opportunistic, because there definitely are a lot of companies out there in federal contracting that, you ask them what they do, and it's like, well, we'll do anything, whatever they ask. And so, we have a bit of that, right? But you also got to know what you're good at, and you got to be an expert at something, right? And so that's the basis for being asked to do these other things that may or may not be